Oh, if y'all don't already know, I have a new second channel that I did a video on yesterday, and I will have linked in the description. It's called Rantating. That's where I'm doing all the more negative style videos, like the rants and such. But, well, for now, let's keep it positive, because one, it's spring break. I have the house to myself for like an hour a day, and only on some days, but now I do, and well, that means I can be actually fully loud and, whatever y'all really call this. How I'd rather do the videos, I guess, would be how I call it. And I guess really more than anything, just enthusiastic and upbeat. And, well, there's a darn good reason to be enthusiastic and upbeat. Because I now have the new track record for the Tucker Expressway Central Outer Loop Circuit Experience. And yes, I also had the old track record for that one as well before they switched the leaderboards. This time around, literally anybody can run an event. They don't have to beat their old time, so just whatever time they get now is what counts. So that means, technically speaking, I am the fastest driver in the world at Tokyo Expressway Central Outer Loop. Granted, there's definitely faster drivers out there, but now they have the opportunity to actually run it themselves. So if they don't, that's not my fault. So until they do and beat my time, I'm considering myself the fastest driver in the world for Tokyo Expressway Central Outer Loop. I surprised myself saying, that's much as y'all, Jiminy Cricket. Well, it's technically a truism right yonder, so figured I may as well do an updated tutorial for this track because, well, as y'all may be able to tell from the time, the physics are a bit different. My best overall time with the old physics system was a 0.6. This is a 0.7, so there's not a huge difference. But I'll be honest too, like in another older video that I made from about a week or so ago, I said that I didn't have as much consistency anymore, but lo and behold, for the circuit experience that probably all, I'm not even lying, probably put 3,000 or 4,000 miles on throughout the course of Gran Turismo Sport, I'm pretty consistent on. Maybe that's just a fluke. 4,000 miles may cause that, but I don't know. I'll do the tutorial on it nonetheless. So let's get into it. Enough bragging for now, but there may be a future video in which there's more bragging in fact, I know there is because I already recorded it. I figured I'd put this video out first while I still have the world record. I mean, hopefully the world record stands for a while. But for while it is standing, I may as well do a tutorial on it. Because honestly, I think that I may, at the very max, be able to get 0.2 of a second more, but I'm not going to lie. If Igor Fraga ILF Racing wants to do this, he's going to run a better time. Steering wheel plus just having more precision, better hand-eye coordination, better reaction time, stuff like that. I just plain don't have a chance against the very best. But they have the opportunity to run it now, so yeah, I'll count it, because they have the opportunity to. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to, but they can, so they haven't yet. So for now, I'm first. So to begin with, well, first, yeah, I'm running counter steering on strong for this one. But honestly, it doesn't make much of a difference. I think the overall time in which can be ran is pretty much equal between strong, mild, and off. Or weak and off, whatever. I can't remember if it's mild or weak. I never really run the middle setting. But anyway, the main difference is consistency. Again, for this one, I'm honestly pretty consistent overall. Again, I also ran like 4,000 miles with this car and track combination, but yeah, counter steering is on strong, but teach their own on that one. And again, I'm also using a controller as well, so factor that in. And then the main thing to factor in too is that this track doesn't have that much braking zones. So there's also no traction control. Just because you never really gain or lose that much traction, because there's not tons and tons of speed loss to gain, because there's no major straightaways and there's no major braking zones. So, while I do have counter steering, I don't have traction control. So that's a thing too. So now getting into the lap. To start off, everyone starts off the exact same way because it's an auto drive. You start off at the line at about 119, 120, and there's nothing that can be changed about that. Yes, I'd rather them start you off at what speed you'd realistically be coming to line 2. Honestly, I'd rather it just be you go as many laps as you want in consecutive order, so that way you can get more of a rhythm. But whatever, it's the same for everyone, so no big deal there. The big deal is, well, the lap itself, because everyone starts the lap the same way. To begin with, this is a Subaru WRX Group 3 car, and it is rear-wheel drive. In general, Subarus are four-wheel drive, but honestly, this car may as well be four-wheel drive, because it is extremely stable. You will never have to worry about the car getting loose. This not something to factor in. This is an extremely easy car to drive, and I'm not just saying that because, well, I'm decent enough at this course. This car in general is an easy car to drive without that big braking or acceleration zone. Meaning you're going to get traction off the turns because none of the turns have major changes of speed, and you don't get loose under braking just because there's not that much braking. Yes, I'd rather it be the Viper, but this works perfectly fine. So, now for the first little bit here, knowing that the car will be stable, just get as close to the walls as possible. This is purely all just practice through here because it's full throttle, so just test yourself to get as close to the wall as possible without hitting it. You can get beyond white line there. This you can be on all day long. Just don't hit this. That's maybe only 1.5 tires width of surface there. So be leery, but yes, you can run it. And then for the next turn, well, just get on the apex of it, and then you're automatically on the outside to turn to the inside of this turn. The first real turn of the track that actually is a challenge. And honestly, this turn I've gotten better at than the previous tutorial I did. In the previous tutorial, I've actually only taken the turn about 124. Again, physics have changed since then, but in general, I also said the physics seem to be slightly slower. Maybe I just have truly really gotten better at this turn, or maybe this is a particular turn in which it's faster, just it's overall slower. Now, it seems like I can actually brake slightly earlier. Before, I braked at 143. Now I'm braking at 142. But ultimately, very slight braking while off the throttle. And get on the throttle pretty much right when you're on the apex. As y'all can see, I'm right on the apex at 125. So 125 is as slow as you need to go to make this turn. Doing it, I'll be honest, this was my version of perfect. Once I get to the actual where it says the split time, I've never had a higher split time than this time around for this turn. So this is perfect as I can realistically do it, and y'all can take that as you may. Again, I guarantee people can run faster. They just haven't yet. That's why I'm doing the tutorial now. Granted, that's probably just going to help the people who can run faster, but with or without the tutorial, they could run faster anyway, so whatever. As y'all can see there, again, I'm on beyond the white line. This, again, don't hit the wall. And then if you go 125 at the lowest speed possible and then throw throttle right when you get on that apex, full lock to the right will carry you out to the next wall. Again, on the white line or a bit beyond it, just don't hit the wall. And that's a lot easier said than done, because honestly, ran this turn in general, just so it more full speed this time. I hit this wall a lot more than I hit this wall. And if you happen to hit that first wall, even just a nudge, you're almost guaranteed to hit the next wall. Because like the force is equal and opposite reaction thing, just it pushes you out towards the next wall. So if there's one wall to hit, it's definitely this wall. But if you're going for the actual world record, definitely don't hit any walls. But just to improve your time, just barely nudging this wall doesn't hurt you as much as that wall. Next turn, it's harder than it may look. It is full throttle, but there's not a big margin of error for this turn. But because it is full throttle, there's not really all that much I can say about it. It's just purely practice. There's no braking zones I can talk about or strategies in which to be able to trail brake or acceleration tactics and when to do it. So honestly, I just kind of have to sew it. I guess I'll sew it like in little increments and then also at full speed. Essentially just turn, well, here. Use whatever you may as like an indicator. But ultimately with this track I do more speed for indicator. So AK 135. I start turning. And then this is the little bit of margin for error. You can go full lock to the right, but if you have to differentiate a little bit and not be quite full lock, meaning like for me it's just a stick all the way to the right, it's fine. It doesn't have to be all the way to right the entire time, but most of the time it does. So there's a little bit of a margin for error, but not much. Ultimately, the little bit of margin for error is if it's looking like you're going to hit this wall coming up, just slightly go off, having it turning completely right. So anyway, to the apex, again, get close to it without hitting it. And by then you're going 137, so the car does still accelerate while you're turning full throttle. The friction's not more than the power or whatever. Which is fine. If you do it perfectly right, it actually looks like there's more margin for error than it really is. Like, that's a lot of room there. But honestly, trust me, it's harder than it looks. I mean, this made it look easy, but this is also my best lap. And again, I said this is literally the best I've ever did this turn. Even with the old physics, which are faster, I looked at my previous best lap that I did the tutorial on. That split sector ended with a .16. In reference, this split sector is a .137. So, I'm faster than I've ever been here. And even with this time around, I think the fastest I've done this sector was like a .149 or something like that. So, I'm quite a bit ahead of my ghost already, which is nice. And the previous best before this lap that I ran was a .92. My overall best after is a .78 total. So ultimately I do gain a slight bit more time on my ghost after this turn. But ultimately a lot of what I gained here was this turn. Granted, this is the only sector other than the full lap that I have the world record on. So essentially I'm doing a tutorial for Sector 1 like right now. Starting off too. This may as well be a tutorial for Sector 1 as well. As honestly I did it, I think as good as I did when I got the world record for Sector 1. Ultimately both were done in about the same way. So next turn. As with the other tutorial, as with the live stream, or not the live stream, the hour footage I uploaded, I need 300 miles to even just get 10th in the world for this one. It's the hardest turn on track. I'm not the most consistent here, I'll be honest. The max amount of speed you can take this turn is just you barely even drop to 140. But, well, here's how I ended up doing it. Ultimately, you start turning slightly after you start going downhill. Ultimately, this is actually a turn in which you can get a pretty good way of seeing when to turn in without using speed. You see how the corner's kind of at an arc there? Like that. So it's gradually turning. Right when it's kind of in the middle of the arc, start turning out. Meaning it's no longer really going back on itself. It's more of a straight line. start turning when it's more at a straight line there. And then you do have to slow down, but you don't have to brake. Ultimately, again, the best case scenario is, honestly, you'd be about 140 at this point, and then you can go immediately to 141. But I was carrying slightly too much speed here, but honestly, that's because I ended, like, close to this wall. I was just being leery to not hit this wall because I was so much ahead of the Ghost. There is maybe 5 or 6 inches, which I could have been closer there. So I will say this is a section in which I could probably gain about half a tenth of a second, maybe. But, as I said before, or I think I said it, I can get about 2/10 more total, but again, I guarantee that wouldn't be the fastest in the world. This is maybe half a tenth of it. So anyway, this turn wasn't downright perfect. The best case scenario is you're carrying about 140, like here, but then you don't have to let off the throttle more to be 139. At that point, when you're carrying 140 instead of where there I was carrying 141, you can just go right on the throttle, and by this point you'd be carrying 141 instead of 139, where I had to let off a little bit after. So yeah, I did lose some time there, but ultimately, again, I'd say it was only about half of a tenth. So anyway, next turn. This turn, I think, is the one with the most margin of error, because ultimately it leads into such a short shoot. More than anything, it's about getting the momentum carried more than the line exactly perfect. As long as you don't hit any walls and get out of the turn at about 135, the amount of speed you carry into the turn is not that big of a deal, just because it's such a short shoot into the next turn in which you have to decelerate. Anyway, so this honestly for me is one of the more fun turns of the track, just because there's a lot of ways in which to do it. So the way that I did it here, honestly, again, this is one of those I don't think I could do better, but this turn is one of the easier ones to do as well. So to kind of take that with a grain of salt. Oddly enough, this isn't the sector that I got the overall best time in, but I think that's just because the general consensus is this is one of the easier turns of the track, for whatever reason it may be. It doesn't look the most easy because it's actually quite a bit of an elevation change, but it's not that bad. I think more than anything it's just a risk versus reward factor of there's not that big of a risk in that turn, just because there's barely any straightaway to the next turn. Really, by the time you even get off this turn, you're almost having to slow down anyway. So if you notice the wall coming off, it doesn't really hurt you much. But I still don't here. Again, I said I did this better than I think I'd ever done before. And the way in which to do it is no brakes. Fully decelerate till, again, you're on the apex. A lot of the times with this track, you just decelerate till you're to like the apex of turn. You get on the throttle once you're on the apex, just so you don't hit it. Essentially, just like right before you hit it, get on the throttle, and if you time it correctly, your car will start naturally carrying out. So that way, well, you don't hit it. Your momentum will just change of going ever closer to the apex spot off the throttle to moving away from it to the other side, to the wide outside turn to carry momentum once you're on the throttle. And again, this is probably the best I've ever did it, but ultimately, nudging this wall isn't the end of the world, because I mean, look, in general what GT Sport already prefers, even when the turn ends, you're already supposedly supposed to be braking for this next turn. Again, I don't use the braking indicator as literally a sign of when to brake. I just, at times, will use it to kind of, however long it's been going, time it like that. Like if the braking indicator's been on for half a second, and that happens to be when I brake, I use that sometimes as timing. But here, I don't use it. That's just a general thing of why I still have it on, because first on turns it is a good way in which to use as a braking point, just not the literal braking indicator, just going off how much time the braking indicator has been flashing for. For this turn, I start braking, well, here. Honestly, this is yet another one where I go by speed, which isn't the easiest thing in the world to do, because again, there's a bit of a margin for error for this turn. So, more than anything, this next turn is more about feel than anything. Yeah, the speed, if you do it absolutely perfect to start braking, is 137. But again, not that big a deal. Just because pretty much almost completely right after turn in, you're going to start braking anyway. So, more than anything, really just do it by feel of that. Like, once the previous turn ends, like you're completely done turning, just slightly after that, start braking for this turn. That's probably the easiest way to say it. Slightly after is a relative term. If you're doing this to try to get a better lap, not that big a deal. If you're doing it to try to be number one, it's just purely about feel. Just when it feels right, do it, and that's a bit more of a practice type thing. So anyway, slowing down for this turn is a bit tricky, because there's a whole heck of a heap of variables. It doesn't matter if you nudge the wall like going off the previous turn, but if you happen to still be on the wall when this turn starts, like when you're not in a straight line, but actually start turning for this turn, the friction of that wall just kind of makes it where you go wide. And then, once you start going into the turn, with extremely slight braking, but not much, mostly just deceleration, just barely tap the brakes to start, there's a big chance, honestly, of hitting this wall. The one closest. Because, look at how that wall is positioned. I'm turning way before this is actually, like, turning. Like, the track is wide enough here, where this wall, it's already curved, but this wall ain't. So essentially, I'm actually turning right for the straightaway, essentially, because it ain't actually turning it. Technically, on this side of the track, this is still the straightaway, so I'm actually aiming towards the straight line. Which is a bit scary, and honestly, yes, this section's probably the one where I mess up the most on. But that is just the design of the track. There's really nothing that can be done about it. Ultimately, this turn you just have to do about perfect, honestly. The last turn is one of the easier on the track. This might be the hardest on the track. I mean, obviously, the very easiest turns on the track are the ones that are just easily full throttle. Like, say, that little first bend right after the start-finish line, but this may be the single hardest turn in the track. And it ain't over yet, because this is more of a feel section there. The first bit, I did the best to explain, where it's a straight line and the other side's curving and stuff. This more is this feel, though, because, as y'all can see, it starts turning about here. So therefore, you also have to change the amount you turn to, according to how the wall changes. So essentially, you have to turn at the exact same angle in which the wall is changing. And I mean, I don't have a protractor, or even a semi-protractor, or even an amateur tractor with me right now, so there's really no way I can judge that. So, take that as you may, is probably the best way that I can say. I don't know, maybe y'all are some protractors here, I don't know. I actually watched some protractor pulling at the fair one time, and that was cool, and the little red wagon Dodge was there, and that was cool. But that's a different story altogether, which may end up a series in the future, but I'm not guaranteeing anything. So anyway, on to the next turn. Or is it? Not really, because this turn you're turning, and then you immediately have to start for the next turn. Like that previous turn, you just start going into it slightly after the easier turn before it ends. This, it's immediate. You have to be right up on this wall when that turn ends to carry momentum, because this turn is full throttle. So you want to go all the way out to carry as much momentum as possible. But that means, yet again, you have to turn exactly with the degree of this wall, so you don't hit it. It's full throttle, so you want to be right on the wall. So again, there's literally no margin for error. Perfectly going, you're carrying 121, but yet again, this is probably the best I've ever carried momentum into this turn without hitting the wall. Any more momentum than this, and you're gonna hit this wall before you start turning into this turn. And then that's just lap over, and more than likely too, you'd end up bouncing into that wall, so that just double kills it. So yes, I do recommend caution for this turn if you're trying to just get a better lap time. But for going for number one, you just have to get it perfect. You have to angle turning into here, the exact angle of that wall again. And I ain't even an amateur tractor for that one, so again, moving on. But then it gets easy, honestly. This is an easily full throttle turn, but it's also instantaneously, again, changing direction. So there is a slight caution there of the car again. As I said at the very beginning, probably the most important thing to know about this car is that it is extremely stable. You don't get loose whatsoever doing this. It's always a cautionary thing when it's an immediate change of direction. And it is here, but it's full throttle. If you've done it right for all the other turns, you're probably good here. But even when I have had really good laps going into this section, occasionally I do mess this up, even myself. So if you're really ahead of whatever you're going for, just use a bit of caution here. I go ahead and go for it here because I am going for first, but just use your own judgment here. And I actually kind of forgot this happened. Apparently, I even do mess up here. I forgot to say that. It doesn't actually even look like on camera that I hit the wall. And apparently I even nudged it so softly my controller didn't even vibrate. But yeah, apparently I even did just barely nudge the wall here. Because look, I lose a mile an hour, and that ain't just from friction. Y'all might be able to hear it. I don't have the sound that loud. I don't know if y'all heard that slight tap or not, but I mean, look, the Ghost is extremely slightly gaining on me. Not much. I mean, I would say in this entire course of the straightaway, like by the time it's done, I may have lost about half a tenth of a second if I'm able to do it literally perfect off the previous turn again. And again, I said that's one of the hardest sections of the track. So ultimately, I'll say if on an absolutely perfect lap, that's maybe half a tenth of a second to gain, but I carried so much momentum to begin with, it's barely a deal at all. I didn't even notice it at the time. So whatever, just again, precaution is good. I just extremely barely nudged the wall there, but all in all, it is better to not hit the wall. But too, if you're like 4 feet away from the wall too, it's still probably going to be slower than just barely nudging it. So again, precaution. Use your own judgment for that. This turn, though, is, again, just as I said, some turns are just downright easy. This one is too. It's easily full throttle. And this is a turn where you can kind of pick if you want to get close to apex or not. Because ultimately it's about momentum. More steering input means more friction, so therefore you might lose speed getting on the apex. Yes, it's less distance traveled, but it's also less speed carried. So like sometimes in NASCAR, the wider line is actually faster because it's just more momentum that the car has, even though it is a longer distance traveled. This is sort of one of that turn. Just pick how you want to do it. It's an easy turn. If you want to take a slightly wider angle, you can, and you won't really lose any time, because it balances out momentum gained versus distance traveled. Ultimately, here I get pretty close to that wall, but there's probably... Actually, that was closer than I actually thought I got. That was pretty much on the inside, but there's a slight margin of error there. So then on to next turn. This is a little bit of a moment to catch your breath in like one breath. If you can catch your breath in one breath, this is a catch your breath moment. And, well, I kind of do. It's okay here. The next turn, though, and even just the last little sector of the track coming up. Honestly, throughout the entire thing, I could probably gain about 1/10 of a second. But as y'all can see, too, from well before, I'm not showing it now, I was probably about 1/10.5 or more up on my Ghost, in which, actually, I didn't do the sector perfectly in the previous lap either. So, yes, I would say my ultimate best time all around would be a high 0.5, which again I ended with a high 0.7. Yes, this is actually faster than my optimal best from before, so that does kind of contradict the going slower in general around this track. Again, I don't know if that's just from an extreme amount of practice, or if that's a fluke or whatever, but nonetheless, that is a truism. I didn't do this section perfectly, but I'll still show it anyway. Because, well, I may come back to this later if somebody beats the lap. And I'd say that's more of a when than an if, but I don't know when that would happen, so for now I'll just say if. If, or maybe when, probably when that happens, I might come back to it. Unless they run like a 0.4 or something, I'll see as it goes. But for now, I'll still show a tutorial on this, and if I come back later, I may just do a separate tutorial for this section. If I happen to do it better, I'll see. But anyway, how I end up doing it is, I'll go back a bit. This is an okay section to know when to start slowing down. Essentially, it's right after the tunnel ends, like right as it ends, right after the tunnel itself has a margin of error because of the light there. Like as y'all can see in this particular section, the light fades a bit. So it's kind of hard to say exactly when the tunnel ends because the roof of it has a bit more lip than the sides do. So it depends on what you're referencing of the part of the tunnel. Are you calling the tunnel itself like the walls of it or like the roof of it, or it kind of just depends? So just kind of go with the light is what I do. Right when the light is fading is when you start braking and decelerating. Ultimately, there is a decent amount of braking here. You're going about 149 or 148 as you start braking. And there's also some trail braking, but not much. It's mostly just fully braking into the turn. Because again, I said as before, this car is actually pretty cockpit and stable. Meaning, even if you're braking in a turn, it's not the end of the world. This car doesn't lose control because of it. And it works for either trail braking or just not using the brakes at all. But for this turn, it works. So no big deal. This turn, that was a bit of a big deal because honestly, again, I don't do it perfectly. I'm carrying a slight bit too much speed there if you look at the arc of the car. At this point, I should still be kind of turning in to the apex a bit more. Now I'm slowly actually moving away from it. I should still pretty much be equal at this point, but again, I'm moving away from it. So okay, I'm carrying a bit too much speed than I should, so I have to let off the throttle on the exited turn. It's kind of just general explaining there. I don't have to give specifics. That ain't the best way of doing it. In general, once you're exiting a turn, you're supposed to be going on the throttle. I'm letting off the throttle. So yeah, I do mess that up slightly. Optimal speed to be carried off this turn is about 112. I'm going about 110. But yeah, again, that's where I say there's probably about 1/10 of a second to be gained through this sector. So no big deal. Again, I said that I messed up, but it was still good enough to improve. And now oh yeah, I forgot. I actually just barely nudged this wall. But this is one of those sections where it's kind of like the easier part of the track. It's such a short shoot to begin with, and you start braking right after this turn ends anyway. Just barely nudging this doesn't matter much. Really even at all for this particular section. Because this is one of those where the force equal and opposite reaction thing kind of helps. He's getting a slight bounce off of this wall. actually means you're kind of already started into the next turn. Because this turn is so long, that ain't necessarily a bad thing. Because that means just that much more gradual steering, which means you can actually sort of kinda carry more speed. I ain't necessarily saying nudging off that wall is faster, but I ain't necessarily saying I'm the best around this section either, so again, take that as you may. But ultimately, just continue to decelerate while being off the throttle, no braking needed. And yeah, there's a bit of a gap there, I'm not gonna lie. Again, I didn't do this perfectly, so realistically, you can probably turn in slightly earlier and carry a slight bit more speed. If you turn in maybe a foot or so earlier, you could probably be carrying about 101 at this point, I'm on full on the throttle either way. And you can exit off the turn with just more momentum. And I even had to let off the throttle extremely slightly there to compensate. Like barely. Just barely even tab off throttle. I didn't even go fully off the throttle at any point. But still, yeah, there's a good 2 feet there that I could have used more. But ultimately, to use that, just turn in slightly earlier. But again, I didn't want to risk it because I'm this far ahead of my ghost. And well, that's the lap. Just go to the outside there. And stay on the outside. There's no point in turning to the inside of the track, even though you'd be better for the next lap. This is a 1-lap event, so you're just done at that point. So, well, there you have it, folks. That's my best lap, again, of a 112.78, exactly. Which puts me 0.98, or pretty much 1/10 of a second ahead of second. And, well, that's good. I think, all in all, it's most definitely worked. Yeehaw!